It's a huge honor to be here with you, especially following that amazing group. I think my favorite word of the year so far is respect, which Alicia just ended with. And I'm going to talk about what I think is my second favorite word, which is collaboration. So we're missing a lot of collaboration in the way that we practice and live health. We as doctors, I have the privilege of being one once in a while, we don't practice alone. And when we do, we're making huge mistakes. So if I'm doing my job well, I'm collaborating with nurses, with physical therapists, with patients. But too often, the important decisions that I'm making, I'm actually making them alone. And I look forward to 10 years from now having a conversation with you and saying something along the lines of, I can't believe how stupid it was the way I was practicing medicine 10 years ago. Can you imagine that I was making decisions about real people that affected their lives by myself? And I even think that we have the notion of patient-centered care wrong. You know, it's clear to, I bet, all of you in the room that the doctor should not be the center of the conversation that we're having and the center of the system that we're building. But when we talk about patient-centered care today, I think mostly what we mean is that we as wise clinicians should think about patients' preferences so that we can put our wisdom into context that makes sense to them. And I think that's missing the point. We need to be collaborating with our patients. To set up this conversation, I'm going to share a little story with you. The whole thing is not a photograph, it's just the head. The rest of it is not my body, and it's not my butt. I don't think it is. And so I had a pretty minor experience as a patient several years back. I was admitted to the hospital. It was actually here at Stanford Hospital, where I got to do medical school, and I had a pneumonia, and I got great care, but you know there's a little bit of a caveat coming. So the day after I was admitted, it had been a pretty rocky night the evening before. The day after I was admitted, I was sitting in the room, looking not unlike that, a little bit too much of my butt, a little bit too exposed, and the nurse came in to my room, and she hung a new bag of something on the IV pole. And I said, hey, what's that? Zosyn. Oh, why are you guys switching me to Zosyn? It's a broad-spectrum antibiotic. Don't know. Doctor's orders. Oh, okay. Could I talk to the doctor about that? Sure. A couple minutes later, I talked to the intern. He said that if you want to discuss it with the team, you'll have to talk to the attending. Okay. That's okay with me. I'd be comfortable with that. And it turned out, a couple too many conversations later, it turned out that decision was made on rounds, that it seemed like I was sick enough in the wee hours that a broad-spectrum antibiotic may have been more appropriate. In the interim, since that decision had been made, I was actually doing quite a bit better. You know, a quarter of a day had passed. And I said, actually, I don't think this makes sense. I happen to have a pretty good understanding of the potential benefit and the potential risk, and I don't like the deal. I want to stick with the current antibiotics. Okay. So this worked out totally fine. You know, I happen to have a bunch of doctor friends, and they're really good doctors, and they're happy to answer my questions all the time. And of course, what I learned about was, well, what if I didn't have, a bunch of doctors on the other side of my phone because of the network that I happen to be blessed with? And I noticed one thing, and actually I tried to do this. I wasn't feeling that great, so I didn't totally trust my memory of what I should be getting for pneumonia. So I wanted to look it up online. And this was a few years ago, and while this is a hashtag to allude to the previous speakers. Actually, I didn't know anything about hashtags then. I was just a dumb doctor. And I wasn't able to get online. The workstations in the hospital were all connected, but there was no Wi-Fi, and there was certainly no Wi-Fi available to patients. And this hit me like a ton of bricks. I have never felt so isolated in my entire life. I've had a ridiculously blessed life. But I was so alone. I was in that room wearing a stupid gown with my butt hanging out, and I couldn't get online to answer questions that I needed answered. And, this is somewhat of a trivial, doctor has experience as patient and learns what the real world is like experience. But I've been thinking about it a lot ever since. I've had a few other misadventures that have taught me things too. There's one product that I've been chewing on that I haven't had a chance to build. I hope I do, or maybe one of you would, and if you do, I'd be thrilled and I'd love to help. And I'd like to talk about it a little bit with you. So here's a hospital room, and in the room there's a touch screen. And what's on that touch screen is all of the active orders for me as a patient, for you as a patient. Here are the current things that your care team has decided are appropriate for you. They're not hidden in the chart. They're not several conversations, several rooms away, as was discussed on rounds, as transcribed then to paper, and then transcribed to the computer, and then transcribed to paper, and then they're there. Here's what's going on for you. And of course, if they're in front of you, they're going to have to get written in English. So imagine you have diabetes out of control, you're hospitalized, you have an infection, which was the trigger of the diabetes, you have difficulty sleeping in the hospital. In general, a lot of people get certain preventative medicines depending on what's going on to prevent them from getting a blood clot if they're immobile in the hospital. And all these things are summarized right in front of you. All the orders organized by problem in a way that you can understand. And when the doctor comes in, or when your nurse comes in, or when the physical therapist comes in, you can have a conversation about those. Say, here's what's going on, here's what's been going on, here's what I think we need to understand better, let's talk, let's make some decisions. Okay, great, here's the updated plan for you, right in front of you. Now, this could be your mom, or your sister, or your daughter, or your friend, who's now in the hospital with you because she loves you. And you say, hey, what's going on? Well, let's take a look. We've been talking about this with the team. Here's my understanding of what's going on for me. Well, what about that part? That doesn't really make sense. You're right. So let's go ahead and enter a question. And we'll queue it up for the next time the team comes in. Say, hey, can we talk about this question that we raised about this particular part of my plan? Or about this part of my plan that's missing, I realized. And the community, the people that love you, don't have to be in the room. What if I could have tweeted or posted to my private community or put on my wall, switch to Zosin, does that make sense? ? This is really scary. There are all kinds of interesting questions which this raises. Certainly, this all needs to be happening in the context of informed consent. I need to really understand what I'm doing. But if I understand what I'm doing, I don't think I'm violating the doctor's privacy. I'm not going to mention him or her by name. And I'd like to have this conversation. I also think it would be fascinating to understand what my mind would be thinking as a doctor, switching to Zosin. Oh shit, what are they going to say on Twitter? Is that a bad thing? I'm not sure. I think it's probably partly bad, and I think it may be even more good. So I want to end by sharing with you a model that I and some others have been thinking about, and this is a complicated workflow of how I think mostly things happen today, certainly how we've imagined them happening for the last many years. There are researchers who have the right questions and the right tools, and they spend resources, figure out what are the answers to those questions. They publish literature, it gets in the news. The expert doctors, sometimes they're the same ones. Sometimes they're clinical researchers. Sometimes they're the ones in the same institution or the ones who are crazy geeky and are going to the conferences. Those expert doctors are the first ones to really understand this. And eventually things trickle down to the community doctors who can't be expert in everything. And you all have probably heard about the so-called lethal lag time in medicine. There's some studies that talk about 17 years that it can take from a really important discovery being bona fide, ready for use in prime time, to when it gets used by the majority of clinicians on the front lines, and to when they're discussing it with their patients. Now, it's probably not 17 years anymore, but I really do think it's measured in years. And that's totally unacceptable. And we really haven't figured out how to fix this in healthcare as we typically define it, as I, until recently, have typically defined it. The good news is, many of you have said, screw that. So you go and you create the right hashtag, you find or build the right community, and you say, hey, I have this. I know some of you have this or something like it. Here's what I understand so far. What have you learned? Oh, well, I've learned the following. I don't understand this aspect of it, but here's a reference. Oh, no, you have the older reference. Here's an updated study. And by the way, a follow-on study is in clinical trial right now. Here's a link to it. No, you guys, you're missing something really important. The amount of knowledge with scientific rigor that's being exchanged among patients today blows me away. And it's turned the lethal lag time of years, in many cases, into one of months. Today, if I have certain questions as a clinician, the fastest way for me to learn the answer is to go and tap in to certain communities of patients. Not because they're smarter than me, not because they're better trained than me, but because they are a network. There are many cases where, to steal from a great book's subtitle, the smartest person in the room is the room. None of us can do this alone. And I think what's happening here is fascinating, and there's a ton to learn from it. And I think one of the opportunities ahead of us is not just to make each of those pretty separate cycles move more quickly, but to figure out how to make them into one more cohesive cycle that moves at lightning speed. Thank you.